Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. Today, we're diving into the increasingly tense intersection of geopolitics and energy markets, and how a regional conflict in the Middle East could hit the world's second largest economy, China, as well as everyone else in the world, including the United States of America. Of course, China has other sources for crude oil, and it would certainly seek to reorient its purchases to other markets. It would take a loss, but it has other options. But less global supply means higher global prices because oil is priced on marginal barrels. So you don't need to import Iranian crude oil to fill it at the pump. It will affect everyone. As tensions rise in the Middle East, the world is watching very, very closely, and not just for what the United States will do, but for how China will respond too, how the world will respond. The stakes are very high, the players are indeed powerful, and the outcomes uncertain and likely tragic. Iran is not Iraq, and for the world, it would not be just another regional war. Too much is at stake in Iran, and too many actors are involved. In 2023, China brokered a very impressive diplomatic breakthrough rapprochement between two long-lasting rivals, Iran and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, of course, being a longtime client state of the United States, a truly ruthless dictatorship that the United States loved to support. The brokered deal was a sign that China had become a true power broker in the Middle East, something that the United States once claimed as its exclusive domain. A recent article published by the New York Times discusses China's dependency on Iran for energy, and so I would like to put this into context. About half of China's oil imports pass through the Strait of Hormuz, just off Iran's southern coast. That choke point is now one of the most vulnerable places on Earth. Although experts do agree that Iran is unlikely to use it as leverage at this point in time, it is clear that for the global south, and more specifically for China and for Russia, Iran is more than a trading partner. It is a geopolitical anchor in the region. American taxpayers have been supporting the United States maintaining military facilities, at least in 19 sites across the Middle East, with 8 of them considered permanent. Egypt. These include locations in Bahrain, Egypt, Iraq, Israel, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and the United Arab Emirates. The number of Western troops stationed in the region varies, but estimates do vary from 40,000 troops to 50,000 individuals. Iran has been literally surrounded by U.S. military bases with personnel present not just from the United States but from other Western countries as well. If you look at Iran's geographic location, you will notice that 2 of its neighbor states, Afghanistan and Iraq, the United States has already invaded, exploited for decades, and left in ruins after its departure. Now, for China, Iran is a strategic energy trade partner, not a military partner. Iran currently exports about 1.7 million barrels of crude oil per day. That may sound like a lot, but globally it is actually less than 2% of total daily demand. However, where that oil goes and how is a far more important story. Since the United States reimposed sanctions on Iran in 2018 under President Trump's first presidency, and following his unilateral withdrawal from the JCPOA nuclear deal, even though the International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed that Iran was in full compliance with the terms of the agreement then, Tehran has been forced since then to get creative in terms of its crude oil sales. Its oil exports are largely sanctioned by the United States of America, meaning that most countries won't touch them due to secondary sanctions. So Iran sells its crude oil at a steep discount to make it more appealing on the international market. Economic sanctions are one of the most favorite coercion tools of the United States, even though scholars have long said that sanctions affect the most vulnerable groups of a targeted country's population, not those who are in a position of power and who make decisions. According to reports, more than 90% of Iran's oil exports now end up in Chinese ports. These refineries aren't state-directed, and they do operate largely outside the influence of Beijing's national energy companies. To protect their profit margin, they began buying Iranian oil en masse starting in 2022 because it is sold at a discount. It is very attractive. At one point in 2023, Iranian crude was actually selling for an average of $11 less per barrel than comparable non-sanctioned oil from countries like Qatar or Oman. Even in 2024, that discount averaged about $4. Of course, now, amid fears of Israeli-Iranian escalation, which is certainly coming from what it appears, the discount has narrowed to just $2. For these Chinese refineries, this discount has increased their profit margin. It made them more profitable. It enabled them to collect more. But it comes with a catch, of course. There is a certain level of dependency. Iran accepts payments in Chinese renminbi instead of US dollars, of course, because it is under US sanctions. And so that actually limits its options on how to spend its earnings. Almost inevitably, that money that it receives from oil sales to China, that money actually flows right back into Chinese goods and services. This feedback loop has deepened Iran's economic reliance on China, and now China in turn gains significant leverage as it maintains its role as Iran's top trade partner. Most of Iran's tankers depart from Harg Island in the Persian Gulf. It is civilian infrastructure. A military strike there would instantly halt most of Iran's oil exports. The consequences of striking civilian infrastructure, such as a seaport, would of course have a massive shock to global oil markets and a direct hit to a significant portion of China's cost-effective energy supply. This kind of move would, without a doubt, have a considerable economic fallout. US policymakers, including Trump, likely want to avoid higher gas prices for American drivers. That would make this war extremely uncomfortable and really something that would drive Americans to oppose it even more. But here's the wild card. OPEC Plus countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are actually sitting on more than 4 million barrels a day of spare production capacity. So that is a lot of oil waiting on the sidelines. And surely China will be able to reorient its purchases in the worst case scenario, even if it means dealing with much tighter profit margins as oil prices increase and supply of oil falls. Please remember to show your support, like, subscribe, and share. Support my work on Substack and Patreon. It means a lot. You will find those linked in the description below. And I will see you back here tomorrow. Bye for now.